You know what, Jeff? It's taken more than 100 episodes, but I think for the first time we have, just like TV shows had this kind of thing, we have a spin-off episode, just like they would have the spin-off shows. This is kind of a spin-off episode, isn't it?
So this is like the facts of life connected
a different
to
world,
different strokes. Come on, different world was Cosby Show. You're
right. But what I'm saying is, a different world was a spin-off of the Cosby Show. Yeah,
yeah, that is true. Yes.
Yeah,
you're right. You're right.
I get a lot of things wrong on this podcast, but I was right about that one in using that particular
Facts of
example.
Life was a spinoff from Different Strokes. Different World was a spinoff from the Cosby Show.
Happy Days and what was it, Joni and Chachi?
Oh, and Mork and Mindy. And maybe even Laverne and Shirley. I know that they were in the same. We are so far into the weeds already. We're like 30 seconds into this episode. We're talking about
this is great though,
TV
because
spin-off.
like my point is that spin-offs, it's a big part of even the music industry. Like what would being a music fan be without the all-star band, the bands that are all-star bands that in fact are not all-star bands, and that will eventually tie in, because we do have an all-star band that I'm sure that people have not thought about in a long time that's on one of the records that we're going to talk about today.
If ever.
I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it to me. I was like, I know that when this particular band revealed itself, being a fan of both artists, I was like, oh shit, yeah, So, but let's start with the spin-off aspect of that, and that is that during our Christopher Cross episode, yes. I just mentioned that, like, as I had been kind of like going back, that I discovered that he had a song called "A Chance for Heaven" that was the swimming theme for the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, which to me was, before we started drilling down, extremely ridiculous, because one, I did not remember that song by Christopher Cross. Two, why would there be a swimming theme? Who even knew that there was a swimming theme for the 84 Olympics? But you did a very helpful thing, which was a short time after we had that discussion about Christopher Cross, you sent me audio for the extremely out of print, extremely unavailable album, 1984, the official music of the Los Angeles, Olympics from 1984. It's got, it's got Roman numerals and all sorts of shit. Like, so obviously I got I just died trying to pronounce that title, which is probably why it's out of print, because they're like, how are we supposed to find the master tapes? We don't even know what this thing is called.
Not only out of print, but as I was unaware until you started listening and complaining about the audio fidelity. It's never been released on CD. It was really only a vinyl title. I think I had it on cassette, but either way.
Yeah, vinyl and cassette.
Never been on compact disc. Certainly not streaming. And so your listening odyssey was very humorous.
The person that put this on the internet took it from a battered, worn vinyl copy that might have been your childhood copy, even though it was a cassette. Like, it's possible that maybe you had a vinyl copy at some point that just got, run over by a truck and other things happened to it, but somehow after that it still played. And the guy that did the transfer, it's not a great transfer. Like, the audio goes in and out of certain channels. Like, it really is like what the listening experience should be when you're listening to something on the internet, and you want the dodgiest copy you could possibly find. That happened. We got the dodgiest copy of the 1984 Olympics soundtrack that we could possibly hope to find. And so as I'm looking at this thing, like, Christopher Cross was not alone. It's like you had basketball themes, boxing themes, gymnastics themes. I'm not that far, as you say, I'm not that far into the weeds. So, my surface awareness of this is that it doesn't seem like they really carried the themes forward in 1988.
Okay, look.
It seems like we should start somewhere concise. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Let's run it down. This 84, we are going to talk about 84 and 88 too. But in 84, here's how they did it. The record begins with Bugler's Dream from the Charge Suite. I'm not going to hum the melody, but you know it. I promise you know this song. Yeah. And then we immediately go into the team sports theme, kind of an all-purpose theme for any team sport you can imagine in the Olympics. It is performed by Loverboy. It's called Nothing's Gonna Stop You Now. This is this is very 1984. Loverboy gets the number 2 spot on the Olympic soundtrack. And then from there, we go to Giorgio Moroder's track theme.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the marathon theme. We'll get to that later in the record, but the track theme by Giorgio Moroder, featuring vocals by somebody named Paul Engelman. That I have no idea who this person is, but the song's called Reach Out.
Yeah.
From there, we go to the basketball theme by Bob James. It's called Courtship, play on words there by Mr. James. And then the swimming theme that you mentioned by Christopher Cross.
Can we stop right there? Like, just think about how many different like audiences and record buyers you've already appealed to mentioning those names.
Yes.
I'm being completely serious. Like, just like the diversity of the Olympics, like they're crossing literally all genres. Like when you're like going from Loverboy to Giorgio Moroder, that's something that one could only happen in the 80s, but also it's just like it's a car crash of epic proportions that you can't imagine happening now, but Loverboy, Giorgio, Bob James. I'm going to stop there. Like those three, like that's the holy trinity of what party did we walk into? Where are we right now, Jeff?
It gets even better, man, because from there we go to Christopher Cross, who reunited with his co-writers on the Arthur theme, Burt Bacharach and Carol Bayer Sager. A Chance for Heaven. The song, if you listen to it, has absolutely nothing to do with swimming. But whatever. I tend to think that maybe this was a song that they worked on thinking of Arthur and then set it aside. I don't know.
I think so.
From there, we go to Mudido, in parentheses, The Match. This is the boxing theme that was contributed by Toto. When this was recorded, they had no lead singer. Bobby Kimball had been fired. So being asked to contribute an instrumental track to the Olympic soundtrack worked very well for them. Then from there, we go to John Williams. You cannot have something like this without the involvement of John Williams in 1984.
You cannot.
This is the Olympic fanfare and theme. He's perfect for this. And then we go to the gymnastics theme, which is a song called Grace, contributed by Quincy Jones. From there...
All right, I'm going to stop you again.
Yeah,
I'm going to stop you
go
again.
ahead, stop me.
How much money has the record industry spent on this album just by the time we get to Quincy Jones? We haven't even mentioned the next guy. The next guy, like everybody else on this album, is going to cost money as well. But we've already spent a lot of the recording budget, and the album budget has already... I feel like, Jeff, I'm going to just say it. I'm putting on the hat that I'm at the record label. I think we're over budget on this album already.
I can't. Yeah, I mean, these are not.
The Olympics must be paying for it.
They're not minor artists, and I also know multiple singles were released from this record. So you know, it wasn't like they just dumped a pile of money into making the album and they put it out as an Olympic keepsake. They were really trying to work this thing on the charts. But so yes, as you mentioned, after Quincy Jones, we get to Bill Conti with a song called Power. This is the Power Sports theme. I don't know what Power Sports are, but whatever. After that, we have Foreigner contributing a song called Street Thunder. This is the marathon theme. It is an instrumental, and it was used as the B-side to I Want to Know What Love Is in Foreigner's very big year, 1984.
I was going to say, by the way, because I do remember that song only because I did not remember it was an instrumental, but I only remember it because eventually, I think when they put out the, I think Rhino Atlantic or whoever put out the anthology Jukebox Heroes, it was when they were still kind of doing like the big like 2 CD. They were starting to call them box sets, but they were essentially like digipacks with a slipcase or whatever the case is. So they put out like a comprehensive collection that had basically all the Foreigner stuff. It had some stuff from the Mick Jones solo record. It had stuff from, basically the singles from the Lou Gramm records, the Lou Gramm solo records. I think it had a Shadow King track. And as I saw this track on the Olympics track listing, I was like, they put Street Thunder on there, and I've had that compilation in my collection for probably, I'm just going to say close to 20 years. I couldn't have told you till last week that was part of this Olympic soundtrack. No idea, Jeff.
I didn't even know this song existed until I sat down to listen to this soundtrack.
The only reason I know that title is because I already own it on a CD that I've basically never heard it, because when I put it on, I was surprised to hear it was an instrumental. But I'm sorry, continue.
No, it's worth talking about. Instrumentals are not really what Foreigner's known for. I think there are two in the catalog.
What's the other one?
Isn't there one on the Mr. Moonlight record?
Oh, yeah. See, and I was thinking maybe there was one somewhere on the first couple records, but I think you're right. I think there is some sort of instrumental on Mr. Moonlight.
There might be one.
Nobody's going to check us on that because we're the only ones that have heard Mr. Moonlight. Nobody else has heard it but us, so we're safe on that one. We can just move on.
All right, moving on. Rounding out the track listing here, we've got Junku, which is the field theme by Herbie Hancock, and then the last song on the album is The Olympian, Lighting of the Torch by Philip Glass. What an assortment of top-tier talent in 1984.
It's incredible. Like, literally, there is not a single dud name in this track listing. It's
right.
Astounding.
They're all people that you know of. There's nobody that's like, oh, that person was famous for 10 minutes in 1984 and they ended up on this. None of that. It's just bang up job of finding artists for this.
And it feels very much like in the spirit of it's again, guys, we're not planners this much, but it is appropriate that we're talking about this album basically in its 40th year, 40 years after the 84 Olympics, so if you thought that was planned, like, wow, that's cool that they're talking about this thing 40 years later. Oh, no. It was just like, it's literally as soon as I found that Christopher Cross had a song on this album, like I was brought back to this album. But what I liked about this album and is that like all right, like's a strong word, but, what I appreciate about this album is that, like, having been basically almost 10 years old when this thing came out, like, of course, the Olympics, I was all about the Olympics, like, I think that was, like, really the first time I remember being aware of the Olympics and just, but it's this thing that when you hear about it as a kid, like, it was very exciting, the idea of all this competition. And I wasn't really a big sports guy, like, so, but they're putting like Mary Lou Retton on cereal boxes, like, like there were things from the Olympics that basically you could not escape the Olympics is the really short version. So as a kid that was sitting around reading a lot of books, but also watching a lot of TV, inevitably I watched a lot of random stuff. And I think, my mom like was a big fan of like figure skating and stuff like that. So it's like there were things that were just on in the house when it comes to the Olympics that I probably otherwise wouldn't have given a shit about, that I just kind of watched like any of us would because they were on the television and you were sitting there in the living room. So this is, I think that my most concise assessment of this album is like, it's a pretty accurate period piece of the 1984 Olympics. Like it just kind of, it captures the rah-rah spirit of what that was in a way that I don't really think foreshadowing. I think that there's kind of a moment that this was achieved in with some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, but like, this really just, this kind of folds in with the rest of everything that is the 1984 Olympics in a pretty perfect way.
I think it also does a halfway decent job of giving you a snapshot of 1984 in music, in much the same way that, like the Ghostbusters soundtrack did, or the Footloose soundtrack did.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you didn't really enjoy this album. I had some fun with it.
I really did enjoy it. Like, I just didn't want to go. I have a tendency to go overboard. I didn't want to go overboard.
You want to oversell it?
I did not want to. I have some restraint, so I was trying to pull myself back a little bit, because I always feel bad for at least 5 seconds if I lead to somebody, down the road. But then I don't care. But you're right. Like, yeah, go ahead.
I would just say I think that the vocal numbers are probably the weakest ones,
Agreed.
Like the Loverboy song, it sounds like every other Loverboy song from that period. If you like Loverboy, then you'll like Nothing's Gonna Stop You Now, but there's really nothing special about it. The Marauder track, I think, is it's somewhat painful. The Christopher Cross song is not his best work. But But like the Bob James song, I think is pretty great. The Toto track is a good time. The Quincy Jones and Herbie Hancock songs are pretty great. I don't know. I was not mad at this album when I finished listening to it.
This is, you mentioned a lot of things, and this is like one moment that I would love to have, like just Lukather walking by so we could ask him, the circumstances, because like he's got a story for everything. It's like I would love to hear the story of how they got involved with this, because I'm sure that in typical Toto fashion, like I think that there's probably some interesting layers, but and just the fact that it comes at a point that, as you say, they didn't have a singer, so it's just like this is the thing about being in a band. Like, you have opportunities that come your way. Sometimes they come your way at a really shitty time. Luckily, in this case, in the case of Toto, with just to name one person alone, you have David Paich, that he grew up around this kind of stuff. Like, so it's just like you had guys in that band, like all these guys in the band in Toto are really smart guys that have that they can figure out 68 different ways to skin the cat so they can be part of the Olympics soundtrack. Even though they don't have a singer, I guarantee you that for those guys, it probably wasn't any sort of obstacle. They're like, we're fine. We'll give them a track. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Like, so I bet that they relished the opportunity to do something like this.
We'll put it in the show notes, but I just put a link in our chat here to an article that was done by our buddies at Something Else. They talked to Steve Porcaro, and he talks about how this was the first song that probably was recorded at Jeff's home studio.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they had no singer, so they were just doing kind of what they could. The funniest, most interesting bit to me that comes out of this piece is that the title it means nothing. It's what they thought the sound of the clavinet bass was on the track.
Fantastic.
So that's what they called it. You and I think, thought that maybe this would have been left over from the Dune soundtrack, because that's another instrumental piece that they did around the same time, but apparently not.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. And I love it when like kind of like either working titles or just something like that become the title of a song, because man, I'm with you. I looked at that and I thought that title would have some sort of deeper, greater meaning, but turns out it doesn't. And I love the circumstances that, like, they're sitting around, they're like, what do we call this thing? It's just somebody says, let's call it this. And here's why we're going to call it that. So pretty great. And you mentioned Giorgio Moroder, by the way. He's this unbelievable name. He's been a part of some iconic things, but I think even Giorgio, I'm willing to like put at least $1 on this. Giorgio would tell you that like he just like basically sometimes just shit some stuff out.
He would probably pretend not to remember this song, would be my guess. He had a very good decade in the 80s, but I don't know about this one song. It's funny that it's the track theme. I guess the other thing to sort of mention in passing is that the vocal numbers, aside from being the weakest cuts on the record, they generally don't seem to have very much to do with the sport they're supposed to be aligned with. I think Reach Out, and this is really not to the song's credit, but I think Reach Out does have lines about reaching for the gold or something like that. But the Loverboy song and the Christopher Cross song, they could have been on any other record in the world.
I like that you mentioned the Ghostbusters soundtrack, because like, like if I don't have the Ghostbusters soundtrack, I'm not sure that I'm familiar with the music of the Bus Boys. So that so the fact that you had this like on cassette, like to this day, like I'm never going to forget that Bus Boys songs. There's elements of the Ghostbusters soundtrack that I'm never, ever going to forget. Because that was a cassette that I had that I just listened to over and over and over again. I loved that soundtrack. So like this Olympics thing, you had it on on cassette, and you're mentioning the Ghostbusters thing just made me like wonder, were there any gateway moments on this thing for you?
Oh man, I didn't own this as a kid.
You didn't own it as a kid?
No,
right.
The most very embarrassing admission. I picked it up. I could be wrong about this, but I think it was like mid 90s. I think I found it on in a warehouse. You remember the warehouse? Yeah,
absolutely.
They did the used cassette section, and I'm sure I only bought it for the Christopher Cross song. I don't know if I knew that it was on there before I stumbled across it in the store, or if I just picked it up and I was like, holy shit, there's a Christopher Cross song that I've never even heard of, and took it home. And, I'm not even sure I really even listened to the rest of the record. I certainly didn't listen to, I never listened to it start to finish until I was getting ready to talk to you about it. So no, there were no gateway moments. There was only a little window into one of the relatively few obscure corners of the Christopher Cross catalog that I didn't know about. Until today, I didn't know this was a single until today. This was a top 20 adult contemporary hit. I had no idea.
The Cross song? Really?
Yeah. Yes.
Good for him.
The Loverboy song was a single too. I don't know what it did. Probably next to nothing, but yeah.
It did enough that they did not include it on their eventual compilations, Big Ones or Loverboy Classics. So without consulting the data, I'm going to guess that it probably was not a runaway smash for Loverboy. That's just, I'm spitballing here, Jeff.
Seems like a safe guess to me.
I'm very, are you surprised that you missed this album in the moment as far as like owning it or whatever the case is? Because I can tell you, like, even though I didn't like retain hardly anything about this record at all, I certainly have a memory that at some point, dude, I totally remember that album cover. Because, I mean, it's the logo from the time. But regardless, like, I remember taking this out from the library on vinyl. It's like...
Really?
This would have been one of those moments that, like, certainly, as we detailed, like, there's not a dud in the track listing as far as the artists here. So as I'm flipping through, like, going, what do I want to take home with my library card this week? Like, this was definitely one that, like, I would have, freaked out, going, oh, man, there's, the Loverboy song and, and so on. And you're right, like, Bugler's Dream, like, there's these songs that I had heard, that being one of them. Obviously, the John Williams Olympic Fanfare, like, I had heard that version. If you were watching any part of the Olympics, you heard that Olympic Fanfare a lot, I'm assuming. I at least remember that it was probably just played over and over and over again, much more than Giorgio Moroder's track theme, which maybe they had some sort of ribbon cutting where they played the song, the track team came out, and Giorgio shook all of their hands, but I doubt it. Like it was probably...
Are you saying that you took this home from the library? You, like, in the day, you checked this out and took it home?
I took it home from the library and soaked it up, and 40 years later, retained virtually nothing about it. And when we were, talking about it, and subsequently as soon as you sent me the album, I'm looking at the track listing and it's all coming back. And I was like and in different ways, like I say, like Street Thunder, like I just recognized that song from the Foreigner compilation, but it's kind of like the, We Are the World album, it's like, top to bottom, like that track listing meant a lot to me. And so when you see all of these songs in the track listing context, it's like things started to come back. And then as I was like listening to it, I was like going, oh yeah, like it just sounds very, as you kind of said in some form, it sounds very of the time, of the era that it was put together and put out. So for me, where I was as an almost 10-year-old kid in 1984, like, this is a lot of what was around. Like, I was seeing a lot of these names like Giorgio Moroder and, Bob James and Bill Conti, things like John Williams, Quincy Jones were more familiar to me, like those two, than some of, but then I had these curiosities, like I was curious about, like, I want to know more about, Herbie Hancock, I had already started to like see his name associated with various things. Of course, for a lot of people, it's going to be, Rocket, I think.
Of course, yeah. This would have been like the year after Rocket, probably.
Yeah, so And then there's just a lot of groups that I was into, like, Toto, Loverboy, as we've talked about. So, Foreigner. So when I took this home from the library, there was a lot there for me, but I think ultimately, it was a lot of empty calories, So, so obviously, as you probably appreciate, like there's the moment where you bring something home from the library, and either it makes another, at least for me, either it makes enough of an impression for you to then go out and buy it, or it doesn't. And this was one of those things that all I can tell you is I listened to it. How many ever times I listened to it that particular week or 14 days before I had to return it to the library, and it did not make enough of an impression for me to, oh my God, I have to go out and buy this. And that's the complete opposite of the We Are the World thing, where it's like there were things on that record that I had to own it because of that record. Good for Nothing by Chicago.
Yes.
Trapped by Springsteen, the live version of Trouble in Paradise, Huey Lewis and the News. Like, so I already mentioned the Ghostbusters thing. Like, so that I think that's kind of one reason that I wanted to talk with you today about, this Olympic stuff, is because the 80s, especially into part of the 90s at the very least, there were just so many of these albums that were constantly coming out for us as music fans that, for me as a music fan, that unlocked a whole separate level of being a music fan, because it's like, wait, I could get a soundtrack for this movie, or once you started realizing that here is this multi-artist album, whether it is a benefit compilation or a soundtrack or whatever it is, and it's got a song from a band that I love, or bands, but let's just say a band that I love that's not on the record that I already own, that they put out this year, last year, whatever the case is. So from that area, as you know, man, if it was the right band that you loved enough, maybe it's you were willing to pull the trigger and buy the particular album on the strength of the fact that it had a Loverboy song that you weren't familiar with. So for me, in the case of this Olympics record, that wasn't the case. No sale. But Ghostbusters, there's any number of reasons I might have bought the Ghostbusters soundtrack. Obviously, the main one being the Ray Parker Jr. song. I'm pretty sure that title song is the reason that I went and bought that. But it's a journey that in the 80s into the 90s, I never got tired of taking that journey and bringing home a multi-artist compilation that was either really awesome or it really sucked. And it's the yin and the yang, as they say.
I miss these records.
I totally miss these records. And there were so many of them that you and I were talking within the past week, and there's a new Little Feat tribute record that came out, and you mentioned to me, you're like, yeah, but there's that other Little Feat tribute record, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're like, you're telling me you haven't heard this record? So what is the name of that record? Because people listening to this, they need to know about this Little Feat record, because it is unbelievable. And it's that speaks to the volume of how much of this stuff was coming out, because it has Jackson Browne, Bonnie Raitt, so many of my favorite artists all on that Little Feat tribute record. I did not hear it at all at the time. And, it was, so what, that was late 90s, right? And so it came out on CMC International.
It did.
Little Feat put out a couple records at the time on CMC. And that's kind of, that's something that I want to dig further into. We're working in the background on that, because I want to know more about the history of that, Little Feat record. So another future spinoff, there's some foreshadowing there, but
it's called Rock and Roll Doctor. I think it predates Little Feat's tenure on CMC by a year. I feel like Under the Radar came out in 98, I want to say.
Yeah, correct.
And this was after they were on, was it Zoo then, or was it Volcano? I think it was still Zoo.
No, it would have been Zoo. It was still Zoo.
Yeah, so they were between record deals, and like a lot of other artists of their vintage during that period, they ended up on CMC, and maybe this is how that happened. I don't know, because it was a licensed thing. We were looking at the liner notes together. It looks like it might have come together in Japan, but yeah, it's very good. It's called Rock and Roll Doctor, and you found it. It's streaming. Anybody can listen to it.
I was going to say, man, that's the good thing. It's on streaming, and I was happy to find it on streaming because anybody that's a Little Feat fan that has not heard this thing, it's stop what you're doing and go and listen to that. We'll still be here when you get back. But yeah, it's on streaming, which interestingly, this album, as well as the next album that we are going to discuss, both I think are basically under the same umbrella of Sony Legacy at this point. And if this finds its way to the ears of those folks, I would love for them to put both of these albums on streaming, starting with this 1984 Olympics album that we're currently discussing. I do know, Jeff, that like obviously it's complicated to put like multi-artist things like this on streaming. Like, you know, at this point there are people sometimes that will say no, but it seems like we're far enough into the streaming thing. It seems like that a lot of those obstacles have fallen away for the most part. And it seems like they're able to figure that out more and more these days with these multi-artist compilations. So
yeah, I don't know what the agreements were. Maybe there was something special because it was an Olympics thing. Maybe they only had the rights to these songs for a limited period of time. I have no idea. The 88 one, unlike the 84 one, did come out on CD, but it is also out of print, unavailable, and it's a pretty different. It's a different kind of record. I can't. We have two instrumentals on this one instead of 3 vocal numbers. The ratio has been flipped for this, and I don't know if I would say that this captures the music of 1988 the same way that the 84 one did with the music of 84. You do have. Well, I'll run down the track listing. How about that?
Sounds great. Yes.
So we begin with John Williams, which is right and just and appropriate. He's doing a song called Olympic Spirit. And then we go into the second song, which if you remember anything about this album at all, it's probably this one song. It's One Moment in Time.
Knows the song.
Yeah. One Moment in Time by Whitney Houston. And I think just with this, 4 minutes and 42 seconds, this album, at least in some ways, eclipses and outclasses its 84 sibling. This One Moment in Time is you could argue that it's sort of cheesy and artificially grandiose or whatever, but it's a pretty good song. It's a very good song. Oh, yeah. And from there we go to the quote unquote super group that you alluded to a little while ago, known as the Bunburys. And I know that most people hearing this have never, ever heard of the Bunburys. It was a very British thing. I think it was attached to some sort of children's film or show. I think you probably know more than I do.
Yeah.
But it's basically the Bee Gees with Eric Clapton.
Which is, for 1988, that's like a power combo right there. Like, it's like the Clapton
they were side both, anyway.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I guess Bee Gees were about a year away from. I mean, obviously, I know ESP. What that was like 87 with You Win Again. So what is?
Yeah.
The one album comes out in 1989.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
They were.
Yeah. So
ESP did okay in Europe, but nobody in the United States cared about the Bee Gees in 1988.
Absolutely. Besides you and I.
Besides you and I, yeah. Clapton handles lead vocals on this song, and there's some very, very 80s Clapton guitar on it, and you can hear the Brothers Gibb doing background vocals. It is an interesting artifact. I don't know how hard I would fight for it as something that you really need to hear. And I also don't know, unlike the 84 album, the track listing does not tell you which events these songs are supposed to be associated with. The Bunbury song is called Fight, No Matter How Long. So perhaps it was meant to be a boxing theme, or maybe it's just a general advice to athletes: fight no matter how long. I don't know. Either way,
it was actually the Bee Gees saying to Eric Clapton, "We will fight you no matter how long." We're going to kick your ass again and again and again.
It was a short-lived supergroup, so maybe that was the message behind the title. I don't know. From there, we go to the Four Tops. Nothing says 1988 like the Four Tops. The song that they do here is called Indestructible. It is deeply, deeply cheesy, and I cannot recommend highly enough that if you have never heard it before, or it's been a while since you heard it, listen to it while watching the video.
Can I tell you something that's completely not surprising? This is one of my favorite songs of 1988. Not kidding at all.
Have you seen the video?
I don't think I have, so I'm going to have to watch the video.
Please watch the video. I felt real bad for the members of the Four Tops while watching that video. From there, we go to Reason to Try by Eric Carmen. I did not know that this song existed, but this is like apparently the third leg of the stool of new songs that Carmen put out during this period that were not attached to an album, right?
Yeah.
You know, he had
Make Me Lose Control and Hungry Eyes.
Yeah. It just baffles me that he was so popular during this period and he had no product to flog. And this is another example of him contributing a new song to a record that he probably wasn't going to make any money from.
I was talking about this with somebody very recently, and that just the idea that Hungry Eyes was this big, huge hit, and then they put out, like, Arista put out, like, Best of Eric Carmen. My memory is that they put the Best of out first, and then, you know, Make Me Lose Control came along pretty quickly after that, and they tacked it on to, like, you know, the next pressings of the Best of. I could be wrong about that, but, like, my memory is that, like, surprisingly, to your point, like, you would think that things would be better aligned. My memory is that, like, they did not do the standard thing where artist has a big, huge soundtrack hit, so they rush and have him record it something else and then pop that onto a retrospective. I don't think it entirely happened that way, but regardless, what I do love about Make Me Lose Control is that, as my Ultimate Classic Rock comrade Brian Raleigh would say, the student understood the assignment, and somewhere in the chain of things, they said, we need another song that has the same vibe of Hungry Eyes very quickly, and they made that happen with Make Me Lose Control. Tell me, because, like, I did not soak this particular song in, like, where does Reason to Try sit with those other two songs? Is it anywhere even in the same ballpark of being as good?
Well, I'm telling you, I listened to it like an hour ago, and I already don't remember anything about it. So I think the answer is probably no.
Fantastic.
From there, we go to the Bee Gees, making their first official appearance on the soundtrack, but their second overall, with a song called "The Shape of Things to Come," which is not bad. It slots relatively neatly into what the Bee Gees were doing during this period. It could have been on ESP. It could have been on One. It's fine. After that, we have Jennifer Holliday doing a song called Peace in Our Time, which became first known to me, and I'm pretty sure first known to you through a different version.
Enlighten me, because I'm not connecting this one.
Eddie Money had a hit with this song.
Oh, shit. Yeah, right. Okay.
Eddie Money put out a best of in late '89, and this was one of the previously unreleased tracks that was on it, and they put it out as a single. And Eddie benefited from some incredibly great timing here, because it was around the same time that the Berlin Wall fell, and so much like Styx would do in a couple years in the future, he had an unlikely hit because people associated what he was singing with real world events. I did not know that Jennifer Holliday did it first.
I didn't know that either. And I think when I was listening back to this 1988 album, obviously I walked out of the room to get a sandwich or something, because Peace in Our Time, I absolutely love that Eddie Money song. That was one of my favorite Eddie Money songs. And, Berlin Wall falling or not, I tended not to get into the whole rah-rah aspect of, songs and timing, because like you mentioned Styx, Styx and Desert Storm, I guess that was probably Show Me the Way, right?
Yep,
yeah,
it was.
So I don't know, man. I just took those songs just as as good songs, and they got blown up in very different ways, culturally, which, good for them, good for the artists. But I always tended to kind of distance myself from stuff like that, because it just felt like very opportunistic
for sure.
Attach yourselves as a song or as a group to a particular thing. And I think that obviously some artists felt similarly about that, because sometimes it was the label. They'd just be like, oh man, we got a song that we can use as like the movement for this thing. So you had stuff that was more organized, like a song that's near and dear, I think, to both of our hearts, Voices That Care.
Right.
That was organized for a certain purpose, but then you have like other things where sometimes it was, and I'm not saying that's the case with Eddie or with Styx, but sometimes it was just completely out of the artist's hands, and it was just the label looking, as they do, how can we capitalize on this moment? What can we do? The nation needs a song right now. Do we have a song from one of our artists? And so sometimes, like, some of these artists got swept up. So anyway, we're in the weeds.
With Styx, I remembering incorrectly? But I think with the Styx song, didn't some radio stations slip in like voicemails from soldiers or something like that?
Absolutely, that was the other thing. They would put in like audio from television and stuff like that, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the last thing I'll say about Peace in Our Time is that it was written by one of your favorite songwriting duos.
Oh, really?
Hill and Sinfield.
Oh man, my guy Andy and Sinfield. What's his first name? I forget.
Isn't it Pete? I think
that could be correct. But yeah, if I was only going to give these guys one award, of course I would give them the largest and most expensive award that I could possibly give them for all the work that they did writing songs for Peter Cetera. That's
on that one record that not as many people bought as were expected to. Yes.
It was you, me, and Jimmy Pardo, but Wall Falling Down.
Yeah.
Fantastic record, still holds up. I thought I was sad enough as a teenager to fully appreciate where Peter was with that record. It turns out Peter was writing about things that my young self couldn't quite completely appreciate, but I thought I did. I thought I knew. I thought I was right there with Peter.
Singing about divorce and saying goodbye to probably half of some pretty lucrative publishing along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so Peace in Our Time ends, and then we move into one song that really does, I think, encapsulate 1988. It's Willpower by Taylor Dayne.
Really?
Yeah, this is Taylor Dayne. Like, she was very popular in 87, 88, 89.
Absolutely.
And here she is singing a song about willpower. From there, we have a couple songs that, I don't know. I have no idea how these people ended up on this record. We have a group called Odds and Ends doing a song called That's What Dreams Are Made Of.
Mm-hmm.
It was produced by Jim Valance, our old buddy. And then from there, we go to a cover of Harvest for the World by the Isley Brothers by a group called the Christians. Again, I don't know. This is not like the 84 thing where you look at the track listing and you're like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. Of course, these people are here. Odds and Ends and the Christians, they must have known somebody behind the scenes. That's all I can think.
Wikipedia says, are a musical ensemble from Liverpool, England. They had the highest selling debut album of any artist at Island Records and international chart hits in the late 80s and early 90s. I want some fact checking on all those statistics. I can't believe all that here in 2024.
The highest selling debut album ever released on Island Records. Is that right?
Of the highest selling debut album of any artist at Island Records.
Get out of here.
That is a band member that has updated the Wikipedia page sometime in the past couple of weeks. No way.
Well, I can't. I'm not going to check that fact right now, but I will tell you that their cover of Harvest for the World is not essential. It does not surpass the original. It is not something that you need to seek out, independent of listening to the 1988 Summer Olympics soundtrack.
So the album by the Christians, it was self-titled, charted at number 2 in the UK, number 64 in Australia, and went 3 times platinum, has their first 5 UK hit singles, Forgotten Town, Hooverville, When the Fingers Point, Ideal World, and Born Again. And I bet you that Keith Creighton could tell us, he could hum at least one of those songs to us.
All right,
I'm willing to bet.
We're putting you on the spot.
We're putting Keith on the clock, yeah.
Yeah. There's only one song left. It's Olympic Joy, an instrumental that closes things out by the one and only Kashif. And
who I've already told you this. I think I have no idea who Kashif is. No idea.
I sent you a link to his Wikipedia page. Did you not open it? He has done so many things.
I'm just admitting to the people listening to this right now.
All right.
That the time you and I first started talking about this album, I had no idea who he was.
You thought you didn't know who he was, but you've definitely heard a lot of his work. A very 80s presence in the studios. I'm sure you owned stuff that he worked on at the time.
Sometimes I just say stuff like this just in the hopes that you'll write me 3,000 words about Kashif for Jeffino Blog. Make it happen. Dear listeners, I can tell you that this very rarely panned out in my favor, but I keep trying. I keep trying to just throw him story topics.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got a long Don Henley post out of it. Maybe it'll happen again. It just didn't happen with Kashif, but
that's true. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the '88 soundtrack.
I've connected some dots here as you've been going through the track listing, and
okay.
This is a trigger warning, Jeff Giles. I'm going to warn you that something happened with this record that very rarely happened in the record industry, and that is there were label connections to a lot of the artists featured on this particular compilation. There are a large number of these artists that were on or had been on Arista Records or were going to be on Arista Records in the future. Obviously, Whitney Houston, no brainer there. Four Tops, the Indestructible album came out on Arista, which I did not realize. Eric Carmen obviously was doing some stuff with Arista in that era because Arista is the one that basically shuffled up the best of that I mentioned and put that out. So that was Arista product. Jennifer Holliday put stuff out on Arista. Taylor Dane was an Arista artist. I will add that I saw Taylor at an 80s festival like 2008 or so. Fantastic. I'm here to tell you folks, I'm not overselling this. A lot of these bands, a lot of these artists, you'll see like a Taylor Dane type person sometimes, and they'll come out and they'll be playing tracks and all that kind of stuff. She had a full band. She had like dancers fully choreographed, like hell of a voice. So, I think and she's one of those artists that like, she had a ton of hit singles. Like I was just there that day going, oh, I can't wait to hear this song and that song. But it's like song after song after song. I was like going, damn, I know a lot more Taylor Dane songs than I thought I did. So Taylor Dane, and I think that's about where I got off. But yeah, there's a large portion of this soundtrack that like, obviously Bee Gees, not Arista. But there's a lot of what would seem to be label favors that were being called in.
That is well worth noting because I think that's probably slightly less the case on the 84 one.
Agreed.
Christopher Cross was on Warner's, Foreigner was on Atlantic. I'm not remembering any on that record right now, but I do remember thinking, this is interesting. How do these people end up on this? And like the Christopher Cross song being released as a single is interesting to me as well because of the fact that he was not a Columbia artist. Yeah.
Narda Michael Walden produced One Moment in Time, the song.
Mm-hmm.
My memory says that Clive Davis probably had a heavy guiding hand in like, the assembly and promotion of this soundtrack. When you look at the details for this soundtrack, there's like 86 different producers listed. I didn't mention, you mentioned the Jermaine Jackson track, but like Jermaine Jackson, of course, had stuff on Arista. He was about to have the Don't Take It Personal album come out the next year. Again, I still don't know anything about Kashif, so I can't tell you, how much of a connection Kashif had with Arista, but I'm sure maybe there was some sort of connection. And the Christians, all I can tell you, man, is that if you have a band that has sold the most records that have ever been sold on Island Records ever, if you're Clive Davis watching that, you're like, I got to get a piece of that for Arista. Let's see if we can get those Christians folks to come and help us out a little bit. So I honestly have no idea how I'm like you. I have no idea how that happened. I don't know how odds and ends happened, but
yeah.
I will say this, like as far as like label, as far as like record label assembled, record label kind of crammed down, here's a track listing that features a bunch of our artists, like this is not a bad compilation as they go. No.
Yeah, it isn't the worst of them. I have to apologize to Jermaine. I was looking at the track listing for the LP edition.
Yeah.
Apparently Jermaine was only featured on the cassette and or CD. So I'm very sorry to Jermaine Jackson and Lala for not mentioning Rise to the Occasion, which came in after Taylor Dayne's Willpower on non-vinyl editions of this soundtrack.
When I looked at the Wikipedia page as I was getting ready for this, there's 3 different editions. There's the U.S. edition, a European edition, and a Brazil-Greece edition. They all look very similar. Like, so I'm like, why was it that they couldn't like get things together to just make one thing for all the territories? The fact that sometimes you see like 3 or 4 or more different editions of an album, and you look at like, okay, the UK edition, you can see this is why they did this because it's got like more UK artists or whatever. But when I like look at the European editions, like, and so on, it looks like a lot of the same stuff. I mean, you still get, even in Brazil, Greece, you still get the Bunburys, you know? So
I was going to ask, do you get the Bunburys?
That's what I had to look at just now. I was like, I better check myself to make sure that Greece got the Bunburys, because maybe that's the difference, is maybe Greece got screwed out of getting the Bunburys, but no, they got it.
That to me feels like it might be the most interesting story. The most interesting behind the scenes story from this soundtrack is how in the world the Bee Gees became so heavily involved with this thing.
I would love to know that. Yeah, we'll have to see if we can like get Barry to talk to us, because maybe Barry Clapton can clear things up. But you know, again, that's not too hard. Like, that's got to be like, both of those have to just be like phone calls like Clive made. Like, and I think that's the era where it's just like, you know, I think that a lot of like those folks like the Bee Gees and Clapton and so on, as we saw from like the Prince's Trust concerts, like there's a lot of those folks that just enjoyed working together.
Yeah, I guess I imagine that if a phone call was made, it would have been coming from the other direction. It would have been the Bee Gees saying, "Can we please be on the '88 Olympics soundtrack?" I can't imagine that Clive Davis really would have cared one way or the other about those guys at that point. But
that's true.
I don't know. I'm waiting for the documentary.
Yeah, that'll be good. If we can have a We Are the World style documentary for the One Moment in Time album, or even just the Bunbury session, I'd be okay with that.
I want it for both of these records, the 84 and 88 ones. I don't think we're going to have time to talk about the 92 one, but I also think that that's probably just as well, because
I think so.
As much as
this kind of turns to something completely different. If we look into the distance, what they assembled for the Seoul Olympics in 1992 with Barcelona Gold was just a completely, that more than anything to me, the first thing I can say is that just felt like strictly a record label, you know, putting some things into the compilation they wanted to highlight. You know, I think In Vogue is on that thing, and I think as you and I were talking about in the week prior, that like that was like before. I think it's Free Your Mind. So Free Your Mind was not a hit single yet. That was my first thought, was like, oh, this is a hit, but it wasn't. It hadn't been released at that point. So yeah, I agree that kind of breaks off from the, if you'll allow me this pun, spirit of the Olympic spirit of the first two.
It's a weird record. Like, you have Eric Clapton doing Wonderful Tonight,
which is just a live version, so it feels like it was just handed. Yeah. You know, you guys want a track, I'll give you a track. It feels more like it should have been like a benefit compilation, that like people were just giving tracks to support the cause rather than a proper, you know, Olympics thing, which it was.
Right. Although it does have Don't Tread on Me by Damn Yankees.
Hell yeah, it does.
And I don't really want to talk about this record, but I think it came out before Don't Tread.
That sounds correct to me. Yeah, sure.
So, because it would have been in the summer, and I feel like Don't Tread came out in the fall. So it bears the distinction of being the first place you could ever hear the title track to the second Damn Yankees record. So it's got that going for it.
I also, that is kind of like, that is one thing I'll say is like, you know, you get In Vogue, and as a surprise, you get Damn Yankees, and vice versa. You get Damn Yankees, and as a surprise, you get In Vogue. So there's some culture shock for some of the people that, oh my God, Mark Cohn. Yeah, yes. That's what we'll throw in is that you told me that's you think that's how you came across that Mark Cohn, David Crosby song.
Yes, for sure. Because no, that is not. Oh, you're going to know the answer to this. I'm not. That's not on Thousand Roads, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Hero's on Thousand Roads,
yeah,
not
correct.
Old Soldier. Yeah,
I don't think so.
Anyway, it's a very strange record. You know, you go from NXS to Rod Stewart to Travis Tritt. This used to be My Playground by Madonna is on there. I think this was the same summer it was on the soundtrack to League of Their Own.
Yeah.
So just it doesn't seem to have the same level of care and forethought applied to it.
I saw a troubling note that in some territories, Not Enough Time by NXS was omitted from the track listing. So I don't want anybody to get too hurt if they go to take if they take the same ride that we did and listen to all three of the Olympics albums. I just want them to know that crushing disappointment could be in store for them. But it's easy enough. I really think that you can just add that to your playlist and you'll be fine. You'll be able to experience it as only a small number of people did in 1992. I don't know. I think this. Yeah, sorry.
That was the last one, right? They haven't done another Olympic soundtrack since.
How are you going to top that? Barcelona Gold. Like, where are you going to go from there when you have Damn Yankees and In Vogue? Let's just say it. When you have Ted Nugent on the same album with anybody else you want to match that up with, how are you going to top that? Somebody at the label probably said, you know what? I think we let's never do this again. And they made a call, and the Olympics were like, you know, I'm glad that you said that because we didn't want to make this phone call, but we never want to do another one of these again. Not after hearing what you submitted to us. Never, ever.
It's a sad thing. And you see that, you know, the 84 one was on Columbia, the 88 one was on Arista, the 92 one was on Warner Brothers. So they were doing some sort of round robin thing here. Whoever was supposed to go next dropped the ball. Yep. It's been more than 30 years. I think enough time has passed. We can start up this tradition again.
I think it's time for a Music of the Olympics box set.
Yes.
Let's do Hands Across America and just bring all the label stuff together and put it out in one set.
As long as it comes with a Blu-ray documentary, I'm in. I'll purchase that box set.
I like that. It's simple. All right. You know, I think that's a good place to wrap. I do want to say that we've been trying to work out the calamities of moving our podcast over to YouTube. So it's like YouTube is a place where hypothetically you can listen to the episodes now, but they keep getting, you know, there's been some bumps. That's all we'll say. But I wanted to mention that we are endeavoring to work that out. And so for those of you that enjoy pressing play on YouTube versus any of your other podcast providers, it is now there for you to enjoy in that fashion. And we're already getting some feedback, such as Norm, who commented on our 1974 project episode for Bob Dylan's Planet Waves. And Jeff, you handled this well. So I want to say that right off the bat. Norm wrote, talking about the mechanics of this brilliant work of art is superfluous to the music and the lyrics. The magic comes from Dylan's mastery and originality of the English language, 20th century Shakespeare. Now, I read this to Annie. Annie's just, her immediate reply, no pause, was, get the fuck out of here. They wrote that. But Jeff handled it more moderately and said, you make a great point. We should delete the entire episode.
He didn't respond to that.
He didn't. Very, very upsetting. So great moments in internet comments. So I just wanted to share that as we wrap things up. And Jeff, I'm glad that we've completed our first spin-off episode. We've done good, I think.
It felt good to me. I had a good time, and I recommend, especially if you didn't even know these existed, if you haven't, seek them out. Find them on YouTube, play them. You're going to have fun. I just love that these existed.
We will throw some links into the show description so that all of you can do just that. And thank you so much for listening.